All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually figure out how to use Salesforce to call itself with a future call or something else. And one of the reasons that we might want to do this is, for instance, in enterprise territory management, we might need to have an Apex class or an Apex trigger that will trigger based off of an update of a field, but it will recalculate the territory assignment. And for some reason, it doesn't do that. And so we need it to react accordingly. And we can't just nudge or update the actual account there in place with Apex. What we have to do is we have to call the REST API. Seems like it should be very simple, calling Salesforce from itself, but unfortunately, it was a little bit harder than you would think. So let's just get right into it. The first thing that we're going to have to do is we have to create an external client app. Then we do an auth provider, an external credential, a permission set, and a name credential. And then finally, we'll be able to test it out. So the first step, let's go ahead and try to jump into that. We're going to create an external client app. So let's go in here. I already have this open, but you can also just go ahead into setup. So I am in a developer org. Really, it's a Trailblaze or a Trailhead org. Um, but yeah, I just went into setup and then I look up client apps and then you pull this up and you go ahead, new external client app. So what did we say the name is going to be? The name is going to be self external client app. To be honest, this name isn't the most important because we're not going to really reference it again, but let's go ahead and try this. Self external client app, right? This email address, if you work for a company, try to make it something that's not just tied to a user because in the future, if that person leaves or whatever, you still want this to, because they might only send an email to this email address once a year or something like that, based off of an issue. And so it's good though to tie this to the company, not to a person. But in this case, I'll just put, example at example.com because we're not actually going to be using this in production. Now I'm going to do API enable OAuth settings. So enable OAuth, the callback URL. How do I get that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the host from the current page URL and I'm just going to get rid of dash setup that comes right before .com. And now what I want to do is I actually want to fill in services auth callback. So I'm going to do services auth callback. And then I'm going to call this self auth provider. This is actually kind of looking into the next step. What we're going to do, we're going to have the API name or I think it's the URL suffix be self auth provider. So that's what we're going to use in the next step. But for now, we do that here. We want to add these scopes, so it's going to be API first and then full and then refresh token. Okay. And I believe that's all we have to do here. So let's go ahead and create that. Cool. All right. So now the next thing we want to do is we want to go into settings. And we want to get the consumer key and secret that's under OAuth settings. So let's click into this. And of course, it's going to send me a verification code to make sure that I am who I say I am because this is highly confidential data. So let's go ahead into my email. I'm just looking on my phone right now so I can pull it up. 1 second here. All right, so the code is going to be 490522. Verify. Cool. Now you can see I have the consumer key and the consumer secret. What we're going to do is we now need to go to the next step. We've gotten through this step. We need to go and create an auth provider. And we're going to set it up. You can see the name that we already talked about, kind of. It's a self auth provider, and then the URL suffix. That's the real part that we had talked about. So let's just go ahead and do that now. Auth provider. You can see that I actually put the dot in here. If you don't put the dot in here, it's pretty annoying, but the search doesn't pull it up, at least as of February 2026. Pretty crazy. Anyway, click onto that and then click new, and now go to Salesforce as the provider type. And let's call this self auth provider. And that is that. And that matches what we had put in the previous step. Now we still have this window open. This has the consumer key, the consumer secret. So just copy that into my clipboard. And let's get the secret as well. Cool. All right. So now you can see that this authorize endpoint and the token endpoint, you can see they're basically going to be the same, but it's going to be /services OAuth to authorize or token. The domain or the host name is going to be the exact same thing that we did for the previous step. So let's just go ahead, fill this in, services OAuth to, and then this is authorize. Cool. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste this. This is going to be token. All right. That's all we have to do in this step. And now we can go ahead and hit save. Excellent. So let's see, what's our next step? We need to make an external credential. I know this is a lot, but it is necessary. So go ahead into named credentials, because that's where we're going to find our external credentials. And then we go and click on the external credentials tab. We click new. And what do we want to call it? We can call it self external cred. It doesn't really matter. Again, that this name isn't as important. External cred. Self external cred. Okay. I'm going to use OAuth 2.0. I want the identity provider to be auth provider. And look, I want to select this as my auth provider. This is what we had already established. So now I go ahead, click save. All right, perfect. I think one thing I might have forgotten actually is I want to put the scopes in here. So the scopes that I'm going to fill in are going to be API and refresh underscore token. All right. Perfect. Now what we need to do is add principles, or just one principle really. This one, so the principle, you can see that I'm going to put self external cred principle. Again, this name isn't the most important, but we will see it later. So self, what did I say? Named principle or something like that. What did I call it? External. Okay. Again, it's not like the most important, but I'll just keep it to what I have in the notes. Name principle. The scope here is not important. In fact, if we were to put another scope here, it would be filled in to the request that goes out when we try to authenticate, which would cause an issue. So we click save. Cool. All right. Now, what we want to do is we want to authenticate. Let's try authenticating. Awesome. So that means that everything is pretty much set up the way that we wanted it to be up to this point. Now we need to authenticate in again as our regular user. So I'm going to put in my username. I'm going to put in my password, and I'm going to log in. And now it should prompt me. Yes, it says security warning. Do you really want to allow access to this self-external client app? It's asking to do the following. And this is from me, so yes, I do. Sometimes if you click allow, it will log you out and show like a little red blurb saying that you couldn't log in or something like that. Just put in your credentials again and hit login, and it should actually take you to this page. That's what I've experienced on other orgs. Now let's go here. It's just kind of confirming again, so I'm going to hit confirm. Cool. That means that we were able to authenticate with that external credential. The next step, let's see, we have to create a permission set. So this permission set is to give any user that we specify permission to run the named credential that we have to do or that we have to create afterwards. So let's go ahead, do new. And let's see, is this important? No, it's not. We can just call it self-external cred though, just like I have in the notes. So self-external cred, right? Okay. And yep, that's it. Let's click that. Oh, we already have one. The label you entered is in use. Okay, yep, that's probably because I was already testing this out. So let's just call it self external cred 2 because we want to be real original. And so now I'm going to hit save. So now I know that I have to look for 2 and not just a normal one. Although it's not that important because I don't think I have to actually access this. What I want to do now is I want to go under apps and look for external credential principal access and edit and bring over. You can see how it has self-external cred, the self-external named principal. So I want to bring that over to enabled. And now save. And now I want to add the users who are going to have access to be able to use the named cred that I'm about to create. So I hit add assignment. Really, I just want myself to be able to use it right now, but potentially you can add whoever you need. Then I'm going to click assign afterwards. And now I'm done. Awesome. I no longer need to be in the permission set. Now I need to go back to name creds. I need to create a new name cred. Finally, the step that you would think that we really wanted to be at in the first place. And this part is kind of important with the name, not so much the label, but the name is important. It says self endpoint. Let's call it that. It can be whatever you want, just you need to know or you need to be able to remember it or at least find it again later on so that you can reference it in your code. So I'm just calling it self endpoint. And the URL, it says specify is that, oh, okay, yep. So I'm just going to take the domain name again, but I'm taking the final slash off and I'm getting rid of the dash setup as usual. And then as far as my external credential is concerned, I want to select the one that I created. Everything else looks good. Let's create it. We're finally done all of this setup just to make it so that we can make Salesforce call itself. um, let's go ahead, run some code. Okay, we already had this code in here, but let's just pretend like I didn't, right? What I want to do is I have it copied. I had some other code copied, I believe. So I put this, my clipboard, bring it over here. Cool. So what are we doing with this test? This test is just going to make a get call, even though, yeah, we could do a patch or anything else, but we're going to do a get call. In this case, we want to query from user, get up to 10 users, and we want to, it should be getting it as JSON. So it's going to make the request out, and we can see that the endpoint, or the name credential is self endpoint. So let's go ahead, try to execute it, see what happens. As you can see, we actually did it. We were able to get the data from Salesforce, querying itself. But of course, this is really more applicable to when you want to do a patch or some other type of request. So that is it. Now, this is the code that I had just used to make that test. Some other code that would be applicable is to make the patch call, right? So if we had a list of records, and really that those records are just accounts with the ID. I only really need the ID, and then I'm just saying, hey, I want to nudge them. Um, I could run this code, assuming that the records is what I just said, and it would go ahead and nudge them. And the enterprise territory management would rerun all the rules to recalculate the assignment of the territories. So yeah, that's everything that's involved. It is a lot, but it will be worth it if you're ever in the predicament that I was in.